Hi, I'm Joe, and I'm going to be talking about the Abrams family of vehicles and its prototypes, and some of the experimental vehicles that were built off of the Abrams, and the more of utility vehicles that are built on the Abrams as well. So we'll start with the prototypes, and the vehicle that the Abrams was originally meant to replace. So, during the 70s, the US military and Germany were both looking to replace their current main vehicles, which for the United States it was the M60, and for Germany it was the Leopard 1. They were looking to replace them because the Soviets were coming up with a new design that had a more powerful gun and a bit more armor, which meant that the American and German things couldn't get through the armor, and they had a not as powerful gun. And this Soviet vehicle was the T-62. But the Americans and Germans decided to work on a joint project. And this was for America it was called the MBT-70. For Germany it was called the KPZ-70. And right from the start, they started having issues, because they really never worked together before on a project like this. And this vehicle was supposed to have a lot of very high-tech equipment for its time. It was probably the most technologically advanced tank of its time. And it was a very interesting looking vehicle. It looked nothing like the Leopard or the M60. And the reason it was so expensive was because of all of the modern technology it had on it. It had stuff like laser rangefinders and an auto-loading system, which most vehicles did not have at the time. It also had a 20mm autocannon on top called the RH-202 cannon, which is basically just a machine gun, but larger. And it also had all of the crew inside of the turret. So no one was in the main hull area, they were all in the turret, including the driver. And what was interesting about this vehicle is that if you turned the turret, the driver would move with the turret, and what they did to counter this so that the driver was always looking forward is that they put him in his own seat that swiveled with the turret, so it would always be looking in the direction that the vehicle was moving. This also means that if you wanted to reverse in this vehicle, you'd just have to turn the cupola around, and you would be looking backwards. Normally, in most vehicles, the driver can't look backwards, so they have to rely on the commander to tell them what's behind them. This vehicle, the driver could look backwards. One of the main issues, the main differences that the American and German vehicles had was the engine. Maybe not the engine, but the type of engine that they wanted to use. And also, measurement systems that they wanted to use were different for like stuff like distance, volume, that kind of thing. Because it's America and Germany working together, they don't mix very well like that. This eventually resulted in Germany dropping out of the project, and America decided to take it a little bit further, and they tried to reduce some of the cost of it by removing some of the more advanced stuff on it, like some of the optics, and they also removed the RH-202 cannon that was on the top, and they replaced it with a 50 caliber machine gun. But it was still seen as just an expensive version of the M60. It didn't really offer many benefits. And another issue that it had was, since the driver's cupola could rotate with the vehicle, that also was a little bit of an issue because the people that they had driving these vehicles were not used to that. They weren't used to being able to move with the vehicle and turning whenever they want. So eventually, America also dropped out of this program, but they still needed a new vehicle. They still needed something that was better than the M60 and could knock out a T-62 easily and effectively. So they held a contest, and there were two companies that joined this contest. One was Chrysler and the other one was General Motors. The General Motors prototype had a diesel engine, and it also had both of these vehicles had the M68 cannon, the same gun on the M60, but they had different rounds that it could fire. And these vehicles were both a lot more mobile than the M60 and had better armor. Part of that armor was newly developed composite armor that they got from Britain. Both of these prototypes had 3 secondary machine guns. The coaxial, which means it moves with the main gun, 7.62mm machine gun, the 50 caliber machine gun that the commander can use, and another 7.62mm machine gun that the loader would use. Both of the vehicles featured the 105mm M68 cannon, and the biggest difference between the General Motors prototype and the Chrysler prototype was the engine. The General Motors prototype used just a standard turbo diesel engine, whereas the Chrysler prototype used a gas turbine engine, which this was the first time that a turbine engine would be used in an American vehicle. But it was not the first time that a turbine engine was used in a mass-produced role to be the main vehicle of a military. The first one was the Soviet T-80 with its gas turbine engine. So during this project, the General Motors prototype was overall better, but the deputy of the deputy defense secretary and the director of defense research and engineering both demanded that a turbine engine was used. So they went with the Chrysler prototype. The first production model of the M1 Abrams main battle tank was, of course, the Chrysler variant that was chosen, and it featured the M68A1 cannon, a similar gun found on the M60, and it also had 3 secondary machine guns, with the option of mounting another machine gun on top of the main gun, although that wasn't standard. It also, since it was the Chrysler variant, had the gas turbine engine, the Honeywell AGT 1500 gas turbine engine, multi-fuel gas turbine engine, although the main fuel is jet fuel, because it is a similar engine to what's found on an aircraft. All of the ammunition stowage, except for about 3 rounds in one part of the hull and another 8 in another part of the hull, but everything else is found in the back of the turret. It holds 55 rounds total in the entire vehicle, and the rounds in the back of the turret are separated from the crew. And when the loader wants to grab a round, the loader has to open a door on the back of the turret, and they can then reach into the ammunition compartment and pull out a round like that. And the reason why it's separated is because it has blow-off compartments or hatches on the top of the ammunition rack, meaning that if a enemy round were to detonate the ammunition in the back of the turret, all of the force from the explosion of the ammunition going off inside of the vehicle would go upwards away from the crew, leaving the crew unharmed, maybe a little bit like shocked because their ammunition just went off inside of their vehicle, but they would be unharmed. And this made the vehicle a lot more survivable than other Soviet vehicles that don't have this feature. It also had composite armor, which was very good, or is very good, against stopping chemical rounds like high explosive anti-tank and RPGs, which use chemical warheads, or I guess shaped charge warheads. It had a crew of 4, the driver, the gunner, the commander, and loader. And it also had thermal optics for the gunner, not for the commander though. That would come on later variants of the Abrams. And there was a later version of the M1 that would increase the turret armor, and this was called the IPM-1 Abrams. And really all it did was increase its protection against, again, chemical rounds. Not much extra against kinetic rounds like Sabo or just straight armor piercing. The Abrams was, as I said before, not the first vehicle, the first mass-produced vehicle to feature a gas turbine engine. That would go to the Soviet T-80. Some of the advantages and disadvantages of having a gas turbine engine is that, well, to start with advantages, you get a lot of power in the engine for not much space taken up. Some of the disadvantages are it consumes a lot of fuel. This thing, like, eats fuel. On a full tank, this can get, I think, about 300 miles, and then it's out of fuel. It also would be an issue if the engine got somewhat dirty. That wasn't good for the engine. It would probably cause failing of the engine, way more than it would cause failing of a diesel engine, or just a standard combustion engine. So, during the lifespan of the Abrams, it was heavily changed in multiple ways. And one of the first main modifications to the Abrams was started in 1985, and it would swap out the main gun for a larger gun. It went from a 105mm cannon to a 120mm cannon, which was a licensed built version of the German Rheinmetall L44 cannon, which was being used on the Leopard 2. It also had more stowage on the back of the turret for just supplies and whatever the crew needs, and redesigned blow-off panels on the top of the turret. The next modification of the Abrams that we're gonna talk about now is the M1A2. And the M1A2 started in 1986. This was a very large upgrade to the M1A1 because it had a lot more armor in the turret. Like, this vehicle had depleted uranium armor, second generation depleted uranium armor in the turret, which would be able to stop a lot of rounds that the M1A1 cannot stop. It also gave the commander a independent thermal sight, so the commander would have his own thermal sight to look out of, and not just night vision or just a standard periscope optic. Eventually, this would be upgraded to the M1A2 SEP, or System Enhancement Package, which had even more armor with third generation depleted uranium armor, and it also had graphite coating on the armor as well. Not much else was changed between the M1A2 and the M1A2 SEP. And then the next one was the M1A2 SEP V2, which added a remotely operated weapon station as a standard thing added on the vehicle. And this was to allow the commander to use the machine gun without being exposed from inside the vehicle. It also allowed for the installation of the Tusk ERA kit and added a phone on the back of the vehicle for infantry to talk to the tank crew. It also had a new transmission for better durability. The next one is the M1A2C, or the M1A2 SEP V3, which added a lot of things to the vehicle, and is currently, well, it was first, prototypes for this vehicle began testing in 2015, and they were first delivered in October of 2017, and the first unit that received these vehicles were in July 2020, so this is a very new vehicle. It added a auxiliary power unit to still have electrical power if you were to turn the engine off, meaning that you could still rotate the turret quickly because it would still have the electric turret drive, and you could still have your thermal optics because you still have electric power, but the engine's not on anymore, and normally the engine would generate power for those systems to run. It also added a trophy active protection system to the side of the turrets, or sides of the turret, and this would be to stop incoming rounds, or missiles, or just anything that was going at it. It would essentially just shoot it down with another projectile to stop it from hitting the vehicle.